Jared's the executive director of Center for Counsel, and he's just published a book called Where Compassion Begins, Foundational Practices to Enhance Mindfulness, Attention, and Listening from the Heart, which really is the core of our counsel practice. Center for Counsel, Jared and Zen Peacemakers have been friends, allies, colleagues, partners for a long time, and I'm really glad to have us come back together in an event like this. And I really want to thank Jared for sharing his time with us today. If you've not been to the website for Center for Counsel, Myoshin just put it into the chat. So click and bookmark. And with that, I will mute myself because there's a noisy work going on in my house, and you don't want to hear that. And I'll turn this over to my friend Jared Seide. So Jared, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I so appreciate that. Click and bookmark. These are words that are so pervasive, and gosh, it's an incredible new world we live in. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity. I so appreciate your presence here, the time you've taken to be with us. It is very meaningful to me. Thank you, Jeff, for holding this, and for everybody at ZPI for creating this opportunity. I guess we are us, and we are also all those who will be watching this later, perhaps in a recorded fashion. So that's great and exciting. Let me just do this here. It means a great deal to know that this is your choice to be here. This is the most important thing that you are doing right now. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all that it takes to bring one's presence to a moment like this. It involves a lot of people and a lot of relationships and a lot of care. The folks who support us and who have loved us and cared for us and provoked us, and on whose shoulders we stand. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all those who have come before, who have made it possible for us to make a choice like this, to be here now in this way. I'm very aware of Bernie's presence, and Roshi Bernie was a big part of my life and is big in my heart. And this conversation reminds me of how present he always is in this work. So I want to kind of shout out to him and to all the teachers and to all those who have had our backs coming to this moment. So thank you to all of them and to all of you. Before any of this, I kind of feel like I want to start with a poem, because poems are great. And there's a piece from Yehuda Hamahai. Hamahai is a poet who has written some extraordinary stuff, and we have permission to use some of the work in the book. And this is a poem that is called From the Place Where We Are Right, and it feels somehow apropos. So I'm just going to dive in with this one and put it out there before we get into introductions and such. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. I think there's so much promise and potential and power and beauty in the practice of not knowing, of finding ways to let go of being right. It's in all of the work we do. It is so easy in some ways to let go of being right when we sit on our cushion, when we are out in nature, when we're taking a hike or at the beach and we're listening and observing. It's often much harder to let go of that when we're with each other, when we find ourselves in human interactions. How is it in our human relations that we can really let go of everything we think we know and be truly present? I hope that in our time together this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you may be right now, that you'll see how this practice of counsel is an expression, is an embodiment of the three tenets in such a deep way. It's really embedded in all of the work we do, and it's what this new book is calling for. I've got about 45 minutes or so where I'd love to share with you the work that we do at Center for Counsel, the evolution of this work alongside ZPI, the nature of the practice as we practice it, and the way it informs all of the programs that we have been able to start and nourish in the world. I hope that that will be interesting for you. And then maybe some of how this book came to be and why it's in the world. And then hopefully we'll be able to bring in some of the voices and perspectives of the folks who have been in this work, who have been our allies and friends and teachers and extraordinary folks who you wouldn't expect to be sitting with us here in the circle because they're in prison, or because they're wearing a uniform and patrolling the streets as a cop, or because they're teaching school or performing surgeries. They're all part of this work. And I've got a couple little videos, and hopefully the technology gremlins will make it okay for me to share with you some of these. And if not, we'll give you some links so that you can follow up on it. But I'd love to bring their voices in, and I've got a few short little videos that I'll bring in over the course of the time. And it would be wonderful to hear from you. I know that folks are deeply engaged in this work, and I'm really excited to hear how counsel lives in your life, how it is that you are curious, exploring, living into counsel, what it means to encounter this work. And after we get through with the presentation, it would be wonderful to hear from you. What we're not going to have time to do is counsel, and that's always a bummer for me. It's beautiful to sit in counsel with folks, and I hope that you will find opportunities, and I'll tell you about some of the opportunities through Center for Counsel, and I know through ZPI, even tonight, there are opportunities for you to engage in counsel online, and hopefully you will avail yourself of that. It is extraordinary that we are able to come together with this kind of presence with the new technology, but we don't really have time to do that today. So I'm just going to sort of jump in and give you an idea of who I am and what Center for Counsel is. I am the executive director. I am the profoundly humbled and grateful holder of the strands of Center for Counsel, which is a weaver of the strands, I should say, which is a nonprofit organization that's based in Los Angeles. The mission of Center for Counsel is to deliver programs and trainings that promote communication, that enhance well-being, that build community, and that foster compassion. The work we do is to build counsel trainings and programs with teachers and kids in school, children, students, with the staff of community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, in hospitals, in businesses, in jails and prisons, and even in police agencies, law enforcement agencies. I am hoping to give you a taste of what this work looks like in all of those places, because it looks very different, but it feels like it is feeding a hunger in each one of those contexts, and has required of us a kind of a cultural humility, because each one of those cultures really has its own language and its own understanding of how it is to be present and how it is to find ways to connect. We've also evolved this practice of counsel very much alongside the growth, the generation and the thriving of the Zen peacemakers, and in particular, the history of ZPI and socially engaged Buddhism in the West has kind of moved in tandem with a lot of what has happened with the practice of counsel and Center for Counsel. As many of you may know, a place called the Ojai Foundation was founded in the late 70s, in 1979, by Joan Halifax. Joan was the first director of the Ojai Foundation, and managed to invite an extraordinary array of teachers and wisdom carriers and medicine people, and really sort of brilliant representatives of a number of cultures who were really looking at dialogic practices and how they informed the development of culture. And they were called so many things. They were called, Ibiraramo and Fambultok and Dare in Africa. They were called Ho'oponopono in Polynesian and Hawaiian cultures. Diwan, Loya Jirga in Islamic traditions, Ma'agal Hakshua in Hebrew traditions. Joan had encountered Quaker practices in the civil rights era coming together and in a devout listening. Bernie and Jishu came up to the Ojai Foundation and attended some workshops up there It was, I think, the mid 80s. It might have been the early 90s, but that was when Bernie began to sort of see what council could be in a very intimate way. And then in that period where the Zen Center of Los Angeles, for those of you who are familiar with it, was going through a pretty turbulent time, the practice of counsel became something that was one of the skillful means of being with how a community moves through difficult times and nourishes relationships in a good way. And so counsel informed that, and because of Joan's involvement with the way of counsel and the codification of how it is we can bring together traditions in a way that is functional, counsel became a foundational practice in the bearing witness retreats and plunges and the work of Zen peacemakers. I guess my personal history begins in about 2012 when Bernie and I sat down, and he asked me to develop a structured set of facilitator trainings. We were moving from the Auschwitz retreats into Rwanda, where we would spend some time. I visited, I think, 6 or 7 times, the folks in Rwanda who were really eager to find ways to heal together in community. And the facilitators in all the retreats were really hungry for more skills around the practice of counsel. And so we designed a program, and we did this prior to and after the bearing witness retreats in over a number of years in Auschwitz, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, and we got to work really exploring the deeper contours of the practice of counsel. It's been incredible to see how folks who have met the practice of counsel in a bearing witness retreat have really sort of ignited this desire to integrate the practice into their lives, into their work, into their communities. And so we've continued these relationships. It's been a wonderful opportunity to get to meet the greater circle. And I've been so sad to not be able to travel, but I've got plans to go back and be with our friends and sanghas in Paris and Portugal and Dublin and Chicago and New York, where Zen centers, sanghas, and various communities have really integrated the practice of counsel into their daily practice, their weekly practice. And I don't mean to say that it's only the Buddhist groups that have done this. We've had some extraordinary imams and ministers and rabbis who have found their way to the practice of counsel as an expression of their faith and their faith in action. So there's a wonderful web of folks who have really deeply plunged into this work of counsel, and it of course has extended beyond just faith groups. And I'm going to get to talk a little bit with you all about what it looks like in a school and in a police department and in a prison, where it feels natural to bring the nourishment of this practice forward. You know, as we practice it, counsel is nothing special. It's coming together to offer regard, to listen without judging or analyzing, to speak authentically. The reason we call it counsel is a guy called Benjamin Franklin was here in this country a few years back and observed the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois people in talking circle, was introduced to this practice and saw it and recognized it as a gathering of people. And the Latin word for a gathering of people is concilium. And so counsel became the word that he used with his very superficial understanding of a practice that he was introduced to. But whether you call it counsel from the concilium, or whether you call it a talking circle or Ibiraramo or Ho'oponopono, there is something about this practice that is so nourishing, and we are finding new ways to understand how to hold it, how to speak of it, how to introduce it. It, I think, boils down to 5 elements. And for those of you who have studied this, I think you'll recognize these. Maybe some of you are not as familiar, but essentially the practice of counsel involves 5 things. It involves a circle, a center, a beginning, intentions, and a closing. So we have a circle, and the nature of circle gives us an opportunity to see who's here, to really show up and to become present, to make ourselves available and vulnerable, and to be able to regard those who have showed up. Simple. And sometimes we get to do it in person. Sometimes we do it with chairs or cushions. Sometimes we do it in a teepee or in a field. Sometimes we do it on Zoom or in an auditorium. And we have found ways to really embody the nature of circle, even when we can't be in a physical circle, a proximate circle. It's a critical part of what council is. The second element is that there's always a center. And the nature of a center gives us the opportunity to bring forth that which is precious to us, that which is really important, and to enact that. So in setting the center in council, we have an opportunity to bring our good intention, bring forth love and care and respect. Sometimes it's a physical object when it can be, and these objects hold who we are and the stories that animate our lives. So we really encourage folks to take the time to create a center. Sometimes it might be just in the speaking of a dedication, a remembering of somebody who we want to give a shout out to, or who is heavy in our heart, or an idea that feels like it is something we're carrying with us that we'd like to set down in the center. Sometimes it's an object that represents what our company is making, or maybe it's a stethoscope or a reflex hammer because it's a group of doctors or lawyers or nurses, not lawyers, hopefully. But it's really amazing how folks have created a meaningful center that represents something precious. So there's always this opening, that's the third element, and there's always a way in which we begin. We sort of navigate the liminality of everything that's happening in the world to this special time, this special space. And we mark that opening, that threshold in a good way, so that it's consensual, that we're together in council. Nobody is coerced or stumbles in or gets dragged into council. Council is something we choose to step into. And it's important that there be a moment where we step in. The four intentions, which is the fourth element that we talk about, you've probably heard, for those of you who've been introduced to council or practice council in different ways. When we listen from the heart, we listen without analyzing or judging, without all the things we do to put things we're hearing into boxes and with labels, and to kind of reduce them to something we can be more facile with, listening in that open-hearted way. And when we speak from the heart, we really allow ourselves to be with what is alive, what is fresh and new, what is spontaneous, arises in the moment. And we remember to go to the essence of what it is we need to say. So this is to listen from the heart, to speak from the heart, to be spontaneous and to be lean. And then, of course, there's a closing, which is the fifth element. And it's important to understand that every council really needs to end. We need to resolve our time together, to bear witness to what we've done, and to step away into our lives in a good way, so that we understand that everything we have done in council is something that is a result of the intention and the regard and the presence. And that may not exist after council, when we get distracted by all the things we need to take care of in our life. So when we step away in a good way, we can navigate the importance of things like confidentiality. Do we really believe that what's said in council can stay in council? Are we willing to make that agreement with each other? Do we understand what it takes to step into council, and are we willing to come back next time? There's no promise of confidentiality or even that it's a safe space. That's not something a facilitator or a book can promise you. It's something a group has to determine and norm for each other. And so how we navigate what it means to hold this in a good way is really what each group does individually when they close the council. I believe it is the embodiment of the three tenets. I think when we listen from the heart, we set aside everything that we think we know about what it is we're encountering, and open our hearts to the true nature of what is in front of us, without the need to have an opinion or have a stance. When we're moved to say and do what is alive in our hearts, it's based on true presence and the embodiment of our true nature. We allow what is emergent in us to be the thing that we preference. So it has been an extraordinary way to take the practice and take these three tenets and really bring them into places in a way that's understandable and can be taught and practiced and normed as part of the work of an organization or an institution. For me personally, I met this practice when my daughter was very young. She was in elementary school, and it was at the time in Los Angeles when things were blowing up. You know, the Rodney King riots were happening. Schools were not safe places anymore, and we were really distraught. I was on the governing board. I was the president of the governing board of the school where my daughter was a student, and we were desperate for some way to bring the school community back to a place of caring and connection. And we had heard that these folks at the Ojai Foundation were experimenting with this practice of counsel and bringing it into schools, and we brought it to my daughter's school, and it was amazing to see what happened. It was an extraordinary experience of watching folks find their story and take the time to really see each other in a new way. And it completely transformed that community. I got to witness a community that was falling apart that I just really had no desire to leave my daughter at anymore, into something very different, into beloved community. It was really amazing and really changed my life and made me think, well, I got to go figure this one out. I got to see what this is all about. And I dropped what I was doing and went off to study counsel and to learn from counsel and to be beaten up by counsel and to fall in love again with counsel, and realized that there was a lot of work to do. And I became the director of the Center for Counsel Training at the Ojai Foundation, which was charged with training folks in counsel. And we had a beautiful few years there, and realized soon enough that we were outgrowing that place, that when we understood the extraordinary need and longing and hunger for this work, we realized that a lot of what we were doing up in Ojai, hippies that we were, and I will claim that mantle, I was part of that, it was just not going to fly with prison wardens and principals of schools and communities that were uncomfortable with that. We needed to find a way to bring this work into a mainstream language and be able to have it palatable for police and for prisons and other institutions. And so Center for Counsel was born in that moment. As soon as we made that shift, everything opened up for us. And the work of counsel became something that was relevant everywhere. And everywhere we looked, we saw suffering, we saw need, we saw longing. And my goodness, you know, as we bear witness to the human tragedy of mass incarceration and systemic racism and the inequities and injustices of our correction system, our sort of social justice safety net, education and healthcare, it was extraordinary to see the way humans were affected by systems that were dehumanizing. And our feeling was this wasn't something we wanted to get involved with on a political level or a sort of a top-down level. We wanted to find a way to bring a practice that would activate the stories of the individuals, to hear voices that had gone silent, to reclaim the stories of folks who were suffering and who were lost. As we would drive our cars along the freeway and see these facilities that 5,000, 6,000 human beings were housed in, sort of forgetting that they each had a story, you know, putting them far enough away that it no longer was relevant to where we needed to get in our cars. That needed to be reversed. We needed to find a way to raise the stories up, to raise the voices up, to listen. And we could do it ourselves. We could create these circles. I'd seen it happen in my daughter's school. And I knew that it could happen in these places like prisons. And it was the first place we realized we could make a difference with the simple practice of coming together in a good way, opening our hearts, offering regard, and listening to the stories. So I want to kind of, I know I'm talking a ton, and I'm sorry for rambling on, but I'm so excited about this work. I want to share with you maybe just a little glimpse into the first group that we were able to bring into counsel in the worst prison, what was then, not now, but then the worst prison in California. This was a place where there were stabbings and killings, and every day there was extraordinary violence. It was a horrible scene, but the warden there invited us to come in and bring a practice of counsel. And we started workshops, and then we turned it over to the guys. I'm going to show you just a couple of minutes from one of the early counsels in the first workshop we did at Salinas Valley State Prison, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
To dedicate this to the families of my victims. You know, they might hate me. I wish really bad things. I wish they would know that I can change. I'm not that man anymore.
I lost somebody close to me not too long ago, and the best thing for me to do was be with my brothers, because if I wasn't able to be around them, there would have been a victim that I would have took their life to fill that void of what was taken from me. And the way I deal with that now on a daily basis is to keep myself around positive people, not be around negativity, come to groups like this, and to always remember her in my heart.
Every day I'm gonna have to live with the fact that not only the life that I took my life from my children, my wife, my mother, my father. These are actions I have to live with forever. So in a way, I'm glad I'm here. Thankful even at times. Because I have brothers here, new brothers, that I know I can lean on now.
I always thought I did what I did because it was me or him, you know what I mean, at the time. But now that I have grown in a spiritual way, I try to work on those things now. I try to like not get mad at myself, not put myself down. I try to forgive myself.
I have never asked my mom to forgive me. When you said that, made me think about I need to go ask my mom for forgiveness, because I'm her baby, and she's always been in my corner, always driving up to Pelican Bay. You know what I mean? That takes a lot, and yeah, I'm never yet to ask her, so I'm gonna make sure that tomorrow I ask her for forgiveness, and I want to thank you for that work.
And compassionate action arises. How extraordinary. The program there in Salinas Valley started with 22 guys in this really dark place, in this prison. After 2 weeks, there were 250 guys on the waiting list to get into that group. And that was an amazing thing, just spreading through word of mouth that this was something. And these were guys, and if you know anything about the prison system, African-American, Mexican, Northern and Southern Mexican, white guys, they don't hang out together. And a group like this is unique and in some ways treacherous, because if you're seen fraternizing with folks who are in a different gang or different ethnic affiliation, it can be something that gets you into some trouble. So they were courageous, but they did some extraordinary work, and they showed us something that was really amazing. Wow, what an experience to go from circle to circle like this. I was so grateful to be able to bring cameras in every once in a while and introduce that into the empty seat. When you have a chair in council that sits and is an invitation to all who are not here with us, all who are with us but not with us, there's a conversation about how will these stories be something that can get into the life of the 12-year-old who's tagging in the community, or the ancestors. And we've talked about bringing a camera in, so we really made the introduction of telling the story part of the council, and we were able to achieve that, and I'm so thrilled. But to witness the courage and the vulnerability and the truth telling and the trust building and the transformation has been really just mind-blowing. The rehabilitation process means stepping away from the world that you have known, stepping away from the story that has been told about you, everything you've been taught to think about yourself, everything you've been taught to think about who you are in the world needs to be let go of. Everything you thought was right needs to be something that you allow to dissolve, so that who you are now is something that can emerge. And these spaces created that opportunity. And when I say these spaces, I mean groups of men. I don't mean me or any book or anything. I mean the fact that a group of folks, later groups of women as well, but in particular, these early prisons were men's prisons. They developed the courage to be human, fully human, supported by the circle. In order to do this, folks need tools. They need an invitation, they need practices, they need skillful means to really attend, to really pay attention, to allow themselves to really listen. They learn to be vulnerable and open their hearts and to imagine who it is they want to become. And in that vulnerability, trust emerges. We don't wait for trust to be vulnerable. We take a plunge and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And from that, a group like this can emerge. And what these guys have done, men and women, has been just remarkable. So we've been doing this for 8 or 9 years in prisons. This one prison enabled us to go up to Sacramento and talk to authorities and say, we need to do more of this. The California Department of Corrections was in the process of transforming itself into the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR. So they had this R at the end of the acronym and thought, okay, rehabilitation, what's that about? Literally. And it was the community-based organizations, those of us who were proximate to the problem, who were able to say, look, we understand what it means to give folks a voice, to create a situation in which there's an invitation to really come and own this space and to inhabit this space in a good way. And so we were able to build a grant fund through the state. We were in another 3 or 4. We are currently, over the years, we are now in 27 California state prisons, representing thousands of incarcerated folks who are sitting in these circles, who have learned to continue these circles and bring it to not only the yard and their cellies, their cellmates and their colleagues on the yard, but when family come and visit, to see the way counsel has expanded in prisons has been really miraculous. But what has been really kind of inspiring in this is guys who didn't imagine there would be a life for them beyond who they were in prison. Folks with life sentence, okay? Even what we call LWOPs, life without the opportunity for parole, LWOPs, have thrown themselves into these groups and have really embodied the practice in such a deep way that they have completely transformed themselves. And they've gone to hearings of the Board of Parole Hearings. They've met with the commissioners and they've gotten grants of parole. And dozens of them have come out into the communities as new versions of themselves. You know, because something they did when they were 18 or 20 or 21 was the worst day of their life and was the effect of causes that went back, in many cases, generations. Who they are in their 40s is very different. They have become different people. There is no fixed self. There is no, you know, you are a bad guy. Many of these folks have transformed, and the commissioners of parole, the Board of Parole Hearings, have recognized that and granted parole. And that's been an amazing thing for us to witness. 2 weeks ago, I went back to prison for the first time in a year and a half. I went to Ironwood State Prison in the middle of the desert. I hadn't been there since 2016. And what I found there were guys who were creating beautiful circles. And they were taught by people who were taught by people who were taught by people that we trained. And to see the way in which this work had become theirs and had informed their culture was really just mind-blowing. And we were able to sort of help them with skills and prompts and ways to work. But we were just so blown away to see this alive after so many years. One of the things that was really moving to me was remembering when I arrived there in 2015, a gentleman who showed up in our council group at Ironwood is a guy named Mitch. And Mitch was a young guy, came in, decided, you know, I'm going to try this out. I need something. He was not embarrassed about the great big swastika tattoo that was emblazoned on his chest. He was a skinhead. He was a neo-Nazi. He was part of something called the Aryan Brotherhood. That's what he did to survive in prison. And he was kind of just like, I've had it. I need to find something new. I think there was one other white guy in the group, and he was definitely not interested in sitting next to anyone who wasn't white, but he decided that this was something that held promise that he didn't really understand, but he needed to be part of. And so I remember Mitch in those first couple of councils being kind of irascible and everybody kind of like rolled their eyes, but something happened in Mitch that was really remarkable. And when we came back after a couple of months, and then again, there was a transformation that he was undergoing. Mitch had a life sentence. And he was expecting 80 years of incarceration. Okay, so life sentence, this guy. And something started to change, so much so that when he went to the board for his hearing 2.5 years ago, it was obvious. He was a different guy and he had something to give. He had transformed himself. He had learned to become a substance abuse counselor and he was ready to go. He was released. He became a substance abuse counselor and then a case manager and then a manager of case managers. I saw the work he's doing and I'm so excited that He is our latest hire. We hired him 2 weeks ago, and he's now on the staff of Center for Counsel. But I gotta just bring in a couple of minutes because we've been doing a little bit of reflecting with Mitch, and I'm gonna share with you some of the things that Mitch has been talking about for another 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll come back and try to get through this. But thank you for listening. I want to introduce you to Mitch. I think he's an important voice. Let's see if we can bring him into this.
Most of us that are in prison have a struggle with emotions. I knew for me, I didn't understand anything but anger. So being in here, I learned how to feel, just genuinely feel someone's story, feel someone's pain.
What was it like when you walked in and you saw this circle in our group for the first time? What were you thinking?
I thought it was very not for me. I just looked at it and I was like, is this like Wiccan? Is this something like voodoo? Like what's going on? What's the circle? What's the little pieces in the middle? Well, I said, look, I'm just gonna try whatever is offered. I'm gonna be open-minded and I'm gonna sit in and I'm gonna basically be quiet and learn. And I'm blessed and thankful that I did, because I've learned so much about human emotion and the things that I just was completely disconnected from. It was something that I could come share my story and my experiences and then look at someone who I thought had nothing to do with anything that I've been through, share a similar story and look nothing like me. You have to really be vulnerable and experience that life condition and the humanity of someone else.
I know for myself, growing up, being vulnerable was pretty much a no-go around the homies or whoever we called our friends back then.
Vulnerability was something that I ran from and I escaped, obviously through substance abuse, and it worked. As a kid, it works because you're 11, 12, experimenting, and it's the very thing that you can run to, and it numbs all the things that you're feeling. Vulnerability, especially early on in prison, or even jail or institutions, no one shows that, because you become a victim. For me, early on, is I couldn't understand that my feelings were hurt. I couldn't identify stuff like that. But counsel helped me empathize, learn compassion through hearing other people's story and really putting the humanity on a different face than I'm used to looking as an enemy. Now I'm looking at it as someone I was like, man, I've been there, I've felt that. I needed tools. And going to counsel and kind of hearing people, all it takes is for 2 people in that group to share to change the whole dynamic of the whole group. You hear someone become vulnerable that's comfortable in counsel, and it puts everyone else's guard down, and it's like, man, what he just shared was pretty real, And once I let that guard down, I wasn't willing to not go there anymore. For me, every time I go to counsel, I tear a piece of my trauma, my experience, my pain, and I put it in the middle of that circle. And I allow each one of the men inside that circle to go ahead and take a piece of it from me. Because it's much easier for someone else to carry your trauma than for you to carry it. So I feel like that's what really happens, is each person shares their experience and their story, puts it in the middle, and then we all leave carrying someone else's burden, so to speak. I'm willing to carry it for you. And that's what I get from the counsel. I think that was probably the first place I've seen tears, we're in a prison environment where someone was allowing themselves to be vulnerable like that. But I finally got to a place for me, I was like, man, that dude's healing. That's what's happening. He is not caring about anyone in this room to the point of he's trusting the circle to be vulnerable and to let those tears out and to let that pain and trauma out. You can't make that up. You can't. There's no script for it. It's authentic. It's easy to put my hands up and fight someone. That's easy. But the first time I walked away from something, coming home and now I'm free, what if someone calls me a name in public and I'm around my wife or kid or somebody and I'm like, okay, I gotta go handle this. Okay, so she can wait another 12 years for me or however long because I need to go handle this? So those are the things I really had to look at the belief that I held and understand this belief is inaccurate. Just because people taught to you doesn't mean it's real. Fighting for your life and your freedom and you don't know when it could potentially come. I always had that desire to do whatever I could. I'm just trying to be the best person at what I'm doing. And I've noticed that just as a byproduct, good things happen.
Boy, I wish you could meet him. I wish he could be here. He's a really extraordinary and dynamic guy. And I'm glad you got a chance to have a quick look at Mitch and what he's doing. He was able to see humanity in a different face. He was able to see the humanity in a face that he didn't recognize because he hadn't spent time with folks who were African-American or folks who were, not like him, folks who were Jewish. And it really changed who he was. And that's an incredible thing. He needed tools and he got to create tools. I will say that counsel looks very different everywhere it shows up, and it has to. I will say that counsel in prisons is something we were able to justify because we knew enough about criminological theory to look at these measures of what they call dynamic criminogenic factors. Dynamic criminogenic factors are those things that can change over time, like empathy and impulse control and antisocial attitudes and antisocial associations. And so we created metrics, and we were able to do pre and post surveys that demonstrated a shift in these dynamic criminogenic factors to be able to prove that this is the work of rehabilitation along the lines that have been established. We needed to take a look at that. When you go into somewhere else, you need to know what that culture is. As Marshall Rosenberg says, you need to speak into the listening. This is not about just using the same language over and over again. It works for incarcerated people, but for healthcare professionals, when we work with doctors and nurses and ER folks, there is an extraordinary situation there that is equally nourished and addressed by being in counsel. This is about counteracting burnout. This is about what secondary trauma looks like. This is about the effects of depersonalization. When you think about the broken leg in room 2 and the heart attack in room 10 and the child with a brain tumor, on the other ward, you've dehumanized folks to their condition. And as part of the training to be in the practice of healthcare, you've got to be able to move in that world, but also realize these are humans who have stories. And if there's no place for that, it starts to eat away at you. So healthcare looks different. In schools, of course, there's a lot to say about work we've done looking at content standards, text to self connections, and what is reading and writing, if not attentive listening and authentic speaking. These are the skills of reading and writing. These are the skills in classrooms from elementary all the way through high school and university level. So there are ways that we have brought counsel into the classrooms, thinking about what it is that our objective is and how to create metrics, because that's the way we have to function. Community-based organizations are made up of folks who are so passionate about things that they do, but they burn out so quick. There is way too much to do and way too little resource. And you begin to have this sort of like drift away from the mission and why you do what you do. How it is we can revitalize that and create cohesion and connection with the mission in community-based organizations has led us to grants where we've been able to train 80 different community-based organizations in the Los Angeles area to train their staff to integrate counsel practice into their staff meetings, and to do this for an hour and a half every week. It's had an incredible impact. I could go on, but the one last piece I want to kind of make sure that I talk about is what has happened with law enforcement. Police move in a landscape of human suffering. It is everywhere they look. People experiencing, in many cases, the worst day of their lives. And so that can be incredibly overwhelming and stressful. And how it is we work with that stress, identify the dysregulation that happens in such a stressful environment, understand the sympathetic nervous system, and when it is aroused, what it does in terms of our behavior and our ability to function, in terms of our ability to really show up and be present, and the maladaptive behaviors that police officers often take on to deal with being sympathetically aroused, like the drinking and the violence and the hypersexuality, all kinds of things that destroy their lives. How to choose those things to deal with stress and what it does, what the real impact is critically important. So not only are there components of health and well-being, but there's judgment and discernment and the ability to de-escalate a situation, to understand that there are humans who are suffering. And when words like "I can't breathe" are spoken, you need to be able to hear those words. You need to be able to hear a human being say, "I can't breathe," and not be so worked up and dysregulated that the words don't even land with you, that you can't discern. And so how we create a relationship with the stressors that we encounter, how we understand from a physical, what is happening in our body, from a mental level, what's happening to our perspective and our biases, our emotional dysregulation and roller coaster that we're feeling throughout the day, and then our relational health. You know, the way it is, we can navigate work-life balance and on the job as police officers, the partner we work with, the unit we work in, how those things become eroded when we are unable to deal with the impact that the stressors are having. These are critical areas of work. And of course, they lead finally to, what about the community? What about the community you serve? If you haven't been able to create a wholesome relationship with your body and your mind and your heart and your family, then how could you be expected to meet the community with compassion? That is downstream of some big missing pieces in the way we understand what policing and law enforcement looks like. So we were able to bring the practice of counsel into this conversation with law enforcement to really get real, to really develop the capacity to be with our vulnerability of what is really going on, required that we teach folks how to create a huddle, a council huddle, and really drop in, much like the guys at Salinas Valley did, to really be able to go there and to talk about what's coming up in an honest way, without all the fronting, without all the, sort of acting out that happens, when we get together, to really address those things. It begins with that vulnerability, and then it creates a circle that represents so much nourishment. The trust is built from the vulnerability. And I would never, invite a bunch of Black Lives Matter activists and a bunch of LAPD cops and say, oh, let's all come into a room and hug it out and hold hands. And, that's just not going to happen. That's just dumb, because folks are so dysregulated already. You can't start there. But of course, it's where we're headed. Of course, we must figure out how it is that we are able to be with the other, right? Who is in our circle? This circle of trust we've created that has become so valuable to us is a beautiful thing. And who's not here? As Bernie used to say, who's not in the club? Who have we decided can't join the club? And what is that about? And how do we understand that? We don't really get to that place until we've created this practice amongst ourselves. And so we start to look at that empty chair in council. We start to think about what is beyond us and them. And this is the last piece that I want to talk to you guys about. It's part of what we're doing. It's our big initiative. Beyond us and them is what we're talking about here. What does it mean? What does that really, really mean? I'm going to show you one more little video. Hopefully this one will be easy and it will be short. And the reason I'm showing you this one is we have started to address this. We created an initiative called Cops and Communities Circling Up. Some amazing things happen. We did a documentary. You're welcome to have a look at it. It's about 23 minutes long. Here's a 2-minute taste of what that looks like when we do that work. Let's see if I can get this one.
I don't think I've ever been in a room with cops without having a feeling of a need to try and run. Right? I don't feel like I have to run. I haven't had that since I've been home.
Taking someone's freedom away. It's a very real, serious thing to put someone in handcuffs and take them to jail. It's a huge responsibility.
And in this community, it can represent oppression, the history of conflict that we've had.
And we named it the rabbit Basil. But it was only Basil for like 2 days because I started calling it Bun Buns, which is so stupid. And everyone calls the rabbit Bun Buns now, and it got huge.
And so just knowing that there is an officer that has a bunny named Bun Bun. Like, I wish that the uniform could also convey those beautiful little sparks of our humanity.
When Jared was talking about it in prison, about what was going on with the LAPD and just what Center for Counsel was doing with law enforcement, and even the idea of bringing, counsel and having it with inmates and COs. I mean, it was like, wow, like I actually see it happening.
It's about the counsel. It's about opening up and being open and aware of new things, because you never know how the person's story is your story.
It's amazing to hear the similarities.
If we open our hearts and minds, we probably can learn so many amazing things about how we can support each other and make the world better.
I'd love for you guys to see the full documentary. It's beautiful. I'm going to read quickly this poem that Coleman Barks gave us permission to use. It's from Rumi. It's a beautiful poem if you don't know it, from The Great Wagon. But just these words here. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And so the question is, can the three tenets lead us to that divine field? Can that place of abundance and compassion, can that be a place we can find through the three tenets? And I believe we can. It's my thesis. It's the book. It's the reason we wrote the book, and it's the reason we do this work. That counsel encourages us to listen from the heart, to deepen our listening. And when we deepen our listening, it builds understanding and empathy primes compassion, and compassion primes relationality. Relationality and relationships make cooperation and cohesion possible, and cooperative and cohesive communities flourish. So as social media contracts us around ideas of us and them and the other, as we view folks who are not on our side, who are on the other side, as being, less than worth considering, less than human, not lovable, that can lead us to some really dangerous places. And I think we have to begin a shift away from that. We have to watch the contraction, and we have to really practice down regulating. We have to practice opening our hearts and listening more deeply. And I'll just finish up with this. And Monica, I know we're going to lose you in a moment. I hope to be with you again soon. I'll say that what happened with us just before the pandemic, as we started to really build some momentum with funders and businesses and others who were starting to see the importance of this work, even places where we didn't expect there would be an openness, like policing. I attended something called the International Association of Chiefs of Police Wellness Symposium. It was the last thing I did before the lockdown. It was March of 2020. And I went to this thing, and it was 800 chiefs of police and sheriffs, and they were all there to look at wellness. And the big question that came from this gathering was, why is it that they keep saying no one cares about them? All the officers say is, nobody cares about us. And we don't know what to do about that. It's like, the agency doesn't care, my unit doesn't care, the community doesn't care, everybody hates me. What do I do? How do we work with caring? What is caring anyway? And how does it have to do with policing? And why is everybody complaining about it? It was such an interesting common theme that I heard over and over again. And I feel like we began to open up this conversation. We had this wonderful grant to start to train the LAPD, to train 200 officers to drop into council huddles. And then the pandemic hit, and then everything closed down. And then we were faced with this moment of like, wow, what is counsel with social distance? Like, how can you be at a distance and be proximate? How can you open your heart with people in presence when you can't be present? What did that mean for us? And it was a real extraordinary time. We were so excited to find that there were ways to utilize the technology. We created social connection councils on Zoom, and we began to offer this, and we had huge waiting lists of tons of folks. And over time, it has kind of gotten more reasonable, but we still offer these once a week, these social connection councils with the format of council, with the intentions of council really built in 90 minutes, and folks from around the world will come and log in, and it's beautiful to see them all. And it was wonderful to begin to feel that the technology could be something we could explore in this crazy time, to really take the work we were doing and bring it into this moment of technological innovation. And who wasn't in our circle? A lot of people were not in our circle. A lot of people didn't have the benefits and the privilege of Wi-Fi and computers and access. Everybody who was in a prison was not able to join us. There was an extraordinary gaping hole in these councils. So many people weren't there with us. And we thought, what can we do about this? How can we serve our community, not just those who are privileged and have the resources to be together here? And we started to get the letters. The letters would come in regularly every day. We had several of them every week. And the letters were from guys in prison saying, I need this. I need my brothers. I need to be in a circle. I need to connect, and I don't know what to do. Because in prisons in California, there was nothing. I mean, things were shut down to the point where folks had to stay in their cells. They couldn't go out into the yard. They couldn't go into the cafeteria. They certainly couldn't meet in groups. Nothing for months and months and months. A sense of isolation, a sense of I'm losing myself because I don't have my brothers to look me in the eye and see me. And we decided we had to do something. So we created correspondence councils. And council became something where we would send in some instructions on how to settle yourself, how to create a special space for yourself, how to choose some objects and make a circle. And imagine those people who are in your circle, alive and not alive, your ancestors sitting around you, and to really bring that image to bear, and then take a prompt that we offered and take a couple of blank pages that we sent and start to write. And so guys would write 2 pages of their share and put it in the envelope and send it back to us. And it took about 2 or 3 weeks, but we compiled these shares from guys at a prison and put together a packet that was that round of council. And so 3 weeks later or so, they would open an envelope and they would create a council again, and they would hear the voices from the other folks in the circle. They would read, they would listen to the voices, and then they would share again. So they'd write another 2 pages and send it back to us. And then another 3 weeks would go by. And so we created these councils through the US mail that gave us at least an opportunity to bring this practice back to guys who were isolated in their cells and had no ability. And it was beautiful. It was so powerful. Folks who had longed for this kind of connection were able to find it again. I was thrilled. And we talked to CDCR and said, this is big and it's working, and what do we do? And we need to write about this. And they said, okay, well, you got a grant, you can't go into prisons, why don't you write a book? And so that's where the book came from. The first version of it is this version. It's a handbook for incarcerated persons. And it was the book in which we kind of laid out what you've learned in counsel, what is important to understand about counsel. And here are some ways that you can engage, whether you have the opportunity to be in an actual circle, or you just want to explore listening from the heart to the world around you, to your own inner stirrings, and to the world you see around you, how to practice and deepen your practice. And it was clear that it wasn't just something that was important for prisons. The world needed this. And so we created this version, which is the sort of the version that is not just about being in prison, but is about how all individuals can do this. And it was a wonderful use of time during the pandemic to create some material that could continue this important work. And I'm really thrilled to have it out there. I feel like I wanted to make a case for understanding and moving towards compassion. I felt like it was important to use this time to talk about what we had learned. I'll read 2 more things and then I'll end this. On the back of this book, compassion, as we understand it, it's sometimes confused with sympathy or empathy. It is neither of those things, though it includes aspects of both. Compassion begins when we allow ourselves to really hear and attune to suffering, that of others and that of ourselves. And hearing and perceiving this anguish, we're moved to do something about it. What takes compassion beyond sympathy or empathy is that it includes action that is considered skillful and beneficial. Counsel is a foundational practice that builds our capacity to perceive the experience of others and invites us to pay attention. When we listen differently, when we listen from the heart to somebody's story without judging, we create the conditions for compassion to arise. The book's an invitation to build the muscle of compassion through exercises and practices that enhance our capacity to listen from the heart, and in doing so, to take care of ourselves and those around us. Yeah, I think we can begin. And I think compassion begins when we allow ourselves to listen in this way, to settle into our practice and to open our hearts. And there's nothing more important. And I guess the last piece before I turn it back over to Jeff, I want to just read you. Mirabai Bush is this wonderful person I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She gave me permission to use this poem at the beginning of the book, and I'll just read it and leave you with this. This is called Why Listening is the Most Radical Act. We need to listen fully. It's the basis of all compassionate action. We need to listen not only to the voice of the person who is hurting, but to her bare feet, and the baby wrapped in her shawl, and the stars in the cold night. Such full listening helps us hear who is calling and what we can do in response. When we listen for the truth of the moment, we know better what to do and what not to do, when to act and when not to act. We hear that we're all here together and we are all we've got. Thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for everything. I so appreciate your time and the opportunity to be in this conversation with you and all of the beautiful work that you do out in the world with ZPI and otherwise. And I'm going to toss it back over to Jeff, and with a great bow of thank you for and appreciation for this opportunity and for all this work and interest in being with you all for the rest of our time in whatever way makes most sense and is most beneficial.
Thank you, Jared. I find myself stuck. It's hard to speak. And that the work you're doing is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I want to save as much time as I can here for people's comments and questions. Mary and Hakeem, we didn't get to welcome you in properly when we began, so belatedly welcome to our little circle here, as it were. And just a couple of housekeeping things, or one anyway. We just added Where Compassion Begins to our bookstore on the ZPI website. So you can buy the book through ZPI. And Jared, I imagine a number of other places, national booksellers. I know Amazon has it, and perhaps Powell's and some of the others, who knows. So highly encourage everyone to take a look at this. This looks like a manual that we can work with for indefinitely for the rest of our lives, really. The film that you referred to and showed us the short clip of, is that available to see somewhere?
Yes. In this world of kind of pulling out our phone and trying to multitask, we really discourage folks from watching it on the move. But so we've had screenings where we've showed it and we've had panels of participants, but we can certainly arrange to offer it to anybody who really wants to take the time with it and really sit for 23 minutes. It really is intended to be something to take in the right conditions. So I'm happy to make it available to members who would like to watch it, or maybe we could even do a screening of it so folks could really take it in without dealing with devices and multitasking. It is our attempt to try to give it the attention it deserves in a good way. But yes, it is available, and we can figure out the best way to make that available. If anybody is interested, they are certainly welcome to reach out, and maybe Jeff, we can figure out a way that we can make it available to members.
Maybe we can set up another event and do a virtual screening. Yoshin has put the link to the bookstore down in your chat as well. So I want to pass over to anyone who's got a comment or a question. Nadia, thank you. Right away.
You're surprised. I rarely talk right away. I don't think I have ever been so moved by a talk. I've been holding back my tears the whole time. Wow, what a work you're doing. And all I want to say is, what can I do? How can we help? Sean, what are we doing in Colorado? Sleeping? Oh, we need to move. I cannot thank you enough for this talk. It is coming from the heart, and it went straight to the heart. So I don't know if you have already in other states an organization that we can do through ZPI, through you. I really want to help.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And again, as I said to Jeff, I think just beginning this conversation again, it had been so deep in the evolution of this work. It's wonderful to resuscitate this. We've tried to do this over the last year, and I'm finally able to be with you all. The organization Center for Counsel has many ways to access what we do, so you can see more of these videos and hear the testimonials, meet Mitch and all of that. We are so eager to share the story, and we so desperately need the support of folks who believe in this work. And as I mentioned, there are communities that have us come and do counsel trainings in Paris and in Portugal and in Dublin and in Chicago. And so we're part of supporting communities that are growing the practice of counsel and want to deepen their practice, and also able to share some material on how it is we can introduce it to the local police and the local prisons and jails. And it is something that we've sort of paved the way and are so excited to see others take on. And I would just encourage you to reach out. We are always eager to broaden our circle, the circle of support. We have newsletters and social media and such. And as we weave together, as an organization that is so close to ZPI, I'd love to continue to weave ways that work we do and work ZPI does can intermingle. But in the meantime, Center for Counsel exists at that website. Check out the website, reach out to me, read our stuff, get involved, and we'd be really eager for you to look at what we do and invite us to be part of supporting your community. We travel a lot. We've got 80 certified trainers that move about and bring counsel all over the world, from Rwanda to Portugal to Hawaii and all areas in between. And we'd be excited. I'll be in Europe a couple of times later in next year. And it's always exciting to see folks who want to bring the practice into their own local communities.
Wonderful. Thanks for the question,
you.
Nadia. Thank you,
Thanks.
Nadia. And Jared, to clarify, counsel training or trainer certification, is this done in person or now in the age of COVID? Is it something one can do remote virtually, or is it necessarily in person?
That's a conversation that's probably bigger than the few minutes we have here. I think that counsel online is a beautiful thing. And I think counsel in person is another thing. And often our ability to be with everything that's happening outside the screen is an important skill set to develop in terms of reading the field and being able to be with, body language and be proximate. So I think there are things that probably exist outside of our ability to train online, which is not to say we can't make a great deal of progress. So it's probably a combination of both. Yeah. And probably there are in-person components that will be important, but there's a lot we can do online as well.
Yeah, thank you. Arthur, hi.
Yeah, I find what you say to be very mysterious and intriguing, because all of my counsel experience is online. So I can't even imagine what it is that you're talking about. I mean, you shared things with us, but those are also on screens, and that was also taken by a camera which has a particular angle, and so I don't know. I guess that's a sort of a weird way of saying that I've definitely really benefited from and grown my connection to my own community through Jeff's work. Sean has brought counsel to our Sangha last Ongo and also during this Ongo, and I definitely have felt it strengthen my connection despite it being online. So I have nothing but good things to say about my online experience.
I would just say that it's really important for us to recognize who's here online in this world and who can't get online, because there's a particular profile that enables those of us who are here to be here, and it has to do with the lives we lead and that which we carry into this life. And many folks are just not here with us because they can't be, and that just really tugged at our hearts. So while we were thrilled in this last year and a half to use these online platforms, we also recognize that it's not the full real world. It's a subset. And those who can practice and be nourished by this, may it be of benefit to them. And may we never forget those who can't be with us because they don't have access for any number of reasons, and find ways to reach out to them as well.
Yeah, there's an element of privilege in this in this access, and you don't have to look much farther than your watch to appreciate that. I mean, it's the middle of the day, and how many people are taking care of their children, or they're in school, or they're working, or they're otherwise engaged. Claudia, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for the fantastic talk. So I got really somehow intrigued and curious to think more broadly about, I mean, how to bring counsel everywhere. That's basically that. I think I hadn't seen it as broad before your talk. And so it made me really curious now to find out, because we all, I mean, I'm hearing about getting nonviolent communication in schools, but I haven't heard bringing counsel practice into schools, for example, in Germany. Maybe it exists. Yeah. So I got curious to find out about this. And I also realized, also, of course, how to get it in my job is also the spiritual practice has always, I'm in a big ministry, in a German federal ministry. And but I have been working for the United Nations, for a big UN agency in the past. And there we had something similar, not quite exactly a council, but something similar as a voluntary offer in a big UN organization working with 3,000 staff. But why, you know, I found myself asking, so why I do think, why I'm not courageous enough to, for example, try to get this in my German ministry. And maybe that's some encouragement I got through your talk. Thank you very much.
And once I heard you speak, I realized maybe I should have said Claudia rather than American pronunciation. Thank you for that. Hi, yes, go ahead. And
can you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Jared. Hi, Jared. I'm in New York. I'm not Hakeem. That's my boyfriend, my soupy boyfriend, Dan. But I'm in the Phoenix airport right now on my way to Tucson to visit family, and I just didn't want to miss your talk today, Jared. And I just wanted to see you live. It's so good. I really miss you and everybody out in California. So I'm really glad that I was able to connect for a little bit today.
Travel safely. I want to see you put your mask on before we're done. Okay, there you go. There you go. There you go. Anyone else like question or a share or a commentary? While people are percolating a little bit, I began my job just 21 months ago, and COVID happened immediately. So the training that I received, the handoff that I received from RAM AFL, all went out the window. You know, everything you know is wrong, kind of thing. And part of that was some of our council work. But what we recognized right away was, because of COVID and because of isolation and because of first responders and the work that they were doing, and we have a lot of people in our community that do mental health work, and that the need for counsel was just amplified. So we really stepped up our offerings, and both in quantity and in type. And Kathleen, I'm so glad Kathleen's here, because Kathleen's been a great partner and a helper in offering more counsel. And we have a women's specific council now that Kathleen's part of, one for mental health workers that Iris Katz leads once a month, and we had one for first responders for a while, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. And as Arthur alluded to, or said specifically, there are a whole lot of people who have experienced counsel only online so far. And I think it'll be so wonderful once we can relax and get back together again, which I hope will happen soon.
I'll just say, you know, we figured out that there was some language we were using with law enforcement that wasn't quite fitting with the culture. And we started to think about some of the words that were coming back to us. And we created this notion of council huddles, huddling up, because, using sort of that sports idea that you got to get into your huddle and figure out what's going on was something they could really work with. The huddles that cops do in council for maybe 30 minutes, once or twice a week, have become part of their kind of everyday practice. And the councils that are called huddles have all the elements that we recognize here, including slowing down, paying attention, a mindfulness or even a meditation moment, prompts, witnessing, opening and closing, all these elements. And they practice it in a way that works for them. And this is often based on their shift work. It's based on what they're doing out in the world. So there is a combination in a lot of the training we do of being present on our screen and then looking at the places in our lives where we interact and finding ways to bring counsel in person. It is different in person. It is not, I'm not going to say it's better or worse, but it is different. And there is so much more information that exists. Everything around me in my room here that you can't see is impacting me, and it's impacting our circle as well, and presencing together the weather and the body language and the clothes we're wearing and those, the person doing work in Jeff's house who's coming and going, all that is impacting our world is something that we get to curate outside of the box when we're in council. And that's great, but there is everything else that exists as well. And it's a really extraordinary thing to be able to really bear witness to all of it and to roll it into our practice when we can. Another way of practicing counsel. So I appreciate that both are alive. And just to say to Claudia that, I had no idea we could do this with cops. I had no idea we could do it in organizations. Snapchat, which some of you may know, does counsel every day in every orientation meeting and in their senior management. Other tech firms, there are places that bring and integrate counsel in very deep ways because we began the conversation and saw that others like us could do this. So we only need to really resolve, we need to listen for that longing and see a way to introduce and not get too invested in the words we're using or the jargon that may be unusual, and invite folks into this. And fortunately, we're developing enough of a sort of archive of different kinds of people doing counsel that often we can get through some of the resistance. When you see other police officers or you see other business people in a council, sometimes it can open the conversation and it's not a bunch of zennies sitting around, in a Zendo and robes, that it's, or whatever it could be, or as Mitch said, some Wicca thing or voodoo, which is often what we get in prisons. It's kind of funny at first, but it's important to get through that. And I would just I really appreciate the part of you that is tugging at that. And I have enormous confidence that when folks experience the nourishment of this work, that it becomes something that opens up in ways we never imagined it could.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jared. Kathleen Hoetsu, I see you have your electronic yellow hand up.
Yes, it's really very yellow. There was a chance in other places where we can change the color of the skin of the hand, but I can't do it here. The yellow hand then, anyway. Yeah, well, it's rich. Thank you, Jared. I was eager to come because you're kind of an invisible companion to me since I practice with the peacemakers now for 10 years and I've been to Auschwitz and also never made it into a workshop there and into a council training ahead of the retreats there. And so I was eager to spend an hour with you. So great to meet you. And yeah, there's such a lot to ponder on now. Maybe just two things. The question on personal and virtual counsel. So I really, as Jeff also said, I'm doing or supporting or hosting online councils now for, I don't know, about 6 years, far before the pandemic started. And it was because of some European folks here, peacemakers, who said, we are missing our friends across the ocean and across the Atlantic, and we want to find a council space which is bigger and because we're missing them, we want to have them in. So that's been the motivation to start with online councils. And I agree, of course, yeah, it's a difference. And I was happy that we could also have live councils for pretty long time in our co-housing community, which Claudia is a part of. So we sat in circle parallel to the online councils, and this is a privilege, of course, to have both. And still, I shared a council yesterday evening, and what you just said, Jared, about what influences us when we're in the same room. That's even a different thing, because I could see yesterday 15 people in their, and today too here, in their living environment, and people coming in, dogs or cats running across the table, and light on, light off, dark and bright. And so all this atmosphere, and this, for me, this is a part of the council training as well, to kind of open my senses through the virtual space into the living space of the people I sit in circle with. So for me, it's a development of my ears, of my listening, of my hearing and sensing. So, and it's, of course, it's forced on us a bit, but I also try to see it as a chance and to see it really as a possibility to expand my possibilities of listening and sensing. And I also try to bring counsel to my work, and I'm which has been a long time working with people, with traumatized people or children and grandchildren of World War II here in Germany, and their biographical experience, and there it was clear that the ritual is very important and strong, to have the frame, to have the middle, to have the beginning, the ending. But now in business, for example, I tried for about a year to bring counsel into the organization that the best man of Claudia's husband worked in. Because he was very excited about it and wanted to have it there. It was a big church institution, but in the end it didn't happen. So it's not so easy if people feel they need to open to a concept that they didn't experience yet. So it's difficult to bring it in from the outside. I feel that, and still going on to try. And then in these surroundings, especially in the economic or business surroundings, I experienced that we definitely, and I guess you feel that too, or experience that too, that we need to change the wording or to adjust wording or to really, adjust to the setting and open up to how people can open to the essence of what it's all about. So this is what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I just want to say it's a beautiful, ongoing, emergent process as we understand and as we listen. And as Bernie always used to say, when you go to Auschwitz, you're listening to so many presences, so many voices. It's impossible not to hear all of them as you sit on the selection platform or in the children's barracks. It's impossible to not be with everything else that's there, and that's a critical skill to be able to find the courage to sit and open to all of the voices, to the ancestors, to all who came before, to the land. It's really important that we deepen our listening in that way. And also just to say that, like I said, it's nothing special. Council is not a magic land where everything goes away and we have some mystical experience. You may be sitting with your boss and your coworker. Yeah. And if you talk about the fact that you like to shoplift and you have an addiction problem, you may get fired. That's real. That doesn't go away because we're in council and it's a magical place where everybody trusts each other. There are guys who sit in council in prison who could say things that would get them in an awful lot of trouble. So it's really important to stay very acutely present, not to get lost, not to be in this kind of, spiritual bypass of like, oh, we're in council, so everything's beautiful, but to really pay attention to what's here and presence what's here. And sometimes when it's off screen, it's a little hard to remember that. but being able to open ourselves to everything, including the corporate environment, including situations where there are power differentials and hierarchies, that's part of it as well. And council can serve in those places as well, as long as we're careful and we pay attention.